Hi, everybody. Welcome to Our Experience, ASCP's podcast. I'm your host, Chad, alongside my partner, Tom. And we are very excited today to have Amy Stewart from AAPACN, which is the American Association of Post-Acute Nurses. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you. I'm happy to be joining you today for this episode.
Yeah. Well, we always kind of start off our podcasts when we're talking about people that are industry experts, thought leaders. What's your origin story? How did you get here?
How did I get here? So I have been a nurse for 27 years. I originally went to school to be a paramedic, and one day when we were out in the cold, I realized the nurses were warm and thought, oh, I made the wrong decision. So I went back to school immediately. I saw how warm and dry the nurses were and went to nursing school. And then I got into long-term care right out of college. I was working as an LPN and loved it and went to RN school. And then later in life, I got my bachelor's degree and my master's degree in nursing. And so I spent most of my career in long-term care in some way, shape, or form, from a charge nurse to the assistant director of nurse assessment coordinator, director of nursing. I worked for a pharmacy for a while as a nurse consultant, and then worked as a VP of clinical and VP of reimbursement until I came here to AAPACN in 2016 as a curriculum development specialist. And then I was promoted to this chief nursing officer, I don't know, several years ago, a couple years ago, maybe. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, you mentioned the cold, so we'll talk about that for a second. Talk about where you live. Like, where are you doing this podcast right now?
I am located in Ely, Minnesota, which is on the border of Minnesota and Canada. I can actually look down the road and see Canada. And we moved here, my husband and I moved here from the Chicagoland area. I came about 8 years ago, and it is the most peaceful place I have ever lived. This area is really known for the Boundary Waters canoe area. So there's a wilderness area, and this past week we've seen the northern lights almost every night. So,
oh, wow. That's
beautiful
awesome.
place to live.
Yeah, that's cool. And did you grow up in the vicinity of Chicago? Where did you grow up?
No, I grew up in Zeeland, Michigan, small town in Michigan, and went to nursing school originally in Michigan. I went to a community college, got my degree there, and then went back to school in the Chicagoland area.
So do the palm the thing. Like where in Michigan? All right, got it.
Over here.
Gotcha. Very good. Awesome.
Almost Indiana there. Yeah, so I was telling her I went to pharmacy school as well in Chicago, and I thought it was too cold for me there because they call it the Windy City, but that always,
Well, you went the other direction.
Yeah, I went south.
Yeah.
I went to got warmer, so her going north is.
Amy, talk about, I've worked in long-term care. I went to long-term care right out of school also, and worked as a consultant pharmacist and a pharmacist in a long-term care pharmacy. When we were early on, like in the 2000s, we worked a lot with a group called Nadana. Talk about where AAPACN kind of originated, give its kind of origin story, because it's sort of the premier nursing organization right now for people that work in nursing homes.
Oh, I appreciate you saying that, Chad. AAPACN is, been around. I think we went with this name in 2019, but it was originally known as ANAC. And our founder, Diane Carter, started this, I believe, in her garage, if I'm not mistaken, and then we grew from there. So that was the American Association of Nurse Assessment Coordinators. Then in 2016 or thereabouts, we launched the AADNS, so the American Association of Directors of Nursing Services. Then as time went by, we realized we were helping two main roles in the nursing home, the director of nursing and the nurse assessment coordinator. And why not bring that under one umbrella? So we became the American Association of Post-Acute Care Nursing. Now, since then, we've also grown into adding services or education for other interdisciplinary team members. So we have things for social services. We're working on some things for administrators. For example, we have the QAPI certification, QCP, which is a lot of administrators are taking that certification, and we're known for actually having the 4 certifications, the original RAC CT, which has been around for as long as I've been into MDS. So I can remember having my ANAC card when we still gave out cards. So I was one of the early members. I think I became a member in 2001, and ANAC was founded in 1999. So I was one of those early members before I came to work here. And I was RAC CT certified, which is kind of our gold standard for the MDS nurse or the nurse assessment coordinator. And then we have the RAC CTA for the corporate consultants. It's that elevated certification for people who audit and teach the nurse assessment coordinators. Then we have the DNSCT for the director of nursing, and QCP, which I mentioned. So
talk about a little bit about that, because I think one of the things that I feel like we try to push at ASCP, even in my prior life working, was, we're in there as pharmacists trying to manage medications on site. Obviously, a lot of our members are the pharmacies that are providing medications to the nursing facilities, but it was like so few of us really looked at the MDS other than what might be collected from the MDS by CMS and then reported back as a quality measure or something else. But that instrument is so important to the role, even the role pharmacies and pharmacists play. What can you say about its evolution? There's a part of you that I think that says, this is, these are where our nurses are working. We have to be the expert at the MDS, but talk about that whole instrument, what it does, what it doesn't do, and things like that.
That's an excellent question, Chad. I'd be happy to talk about. The minimum data set is a clinical assessment tool that is used to collect data at a specified time frame, So it takes a snapshot of the resident's stay in the nursing home. Typically, the look back for an MDS is that assessment period is 7 days, but sometimes in some ways it's 30 days. In other ways, it goes back even further. So its original purpose was to help develop a care plan. And the MDS has really evolved since then. Now, like you said, it's used for quality measures. It is used to identify survey regulatory concerns or potential concerns. So surveyors, when they walk in, have data from the MDS that they can use to hone in. It's like the one resident that had a fall, has a pressure ulcer, and lost weight, and that's, the surveyor goes and looks at that person. Well, it's because they have that MDS information. So if it was captured on the most recent MDS, the surveyors are going to know about it. It is also used for clinical reimbursement in many cases. Started out as a clinical reimbursement tool for Medicare, kind of evolved. Lots of Medicaid states are using it for Medicaid payment as well. And then in 2025, later this year in October, states have to make the decision, are you going to use PDPM or some other factor for Medicaid case mix, because the current version that some states are using, called an OSA version of the MDS, is going away on October 1st. So that is how it's used. And then on top of it, you see it being used in the 5-star quality rating. So the quality measures that are used in the 5-star rating system, some of those come from the MDS and some of them come from claims.
So, I mean, in my mind, that makes it this obviously critically important function at the nursing facility. Not only is it, the two things I think that nursing homes think about the most is survey and reimbursement. And this tool sits right in the middle of that. I don't know, how do you think that changes how facilities look at the MDS from that standpoint? Obviously, there's a critical need to make sure that you're doing everything that you can to make sure your reimbursement is correct. And the other side of it is, dealing with the fact that somebody's going to use this instrument potentially against you when they come in for a survey. Like I don't know, I won't go off on my tangent on government overreach and regulation, but this thing sits in the middle of that.
That's why MDS coordinators, having good MDS coordinators, are so critical.
Yes.
It is a critical role. And on top of that, now there's some added language or redefined language in the Appendix PP that is coming out April 28th. That's when it's supposed to go into effect. That talks a little bit more about fraud of the MDS, so coding things that are not accurate, which adds another layer of responsibility and accountability to that nurse assessment coordinator. So the MDS is a huge tool for clinical reimbursement and quality. So the MDS, the one thing that people need to know about the MDS is the nurse assessment coordinator is using the documentation that is already in the record to determine many of the items that are on the MDS. So if it's not documented, it wasn't done. And that's one of the challenges for the nurse assessment coordinator is having this document that, I might know this person has a wound that's present on admission, but the wound wasn't captured in the documentation until 5 days later. So I have no proof that this was present on admission unless I go chasing after something, some documentation. So this role is becoming, hyper focused on fraud. I'm going to try not to get on my soapbox about the schizophrenia audits.
Yeah.
But the schizophrenia audits that are being done is to avoid, if you have an antipsychotic and you are given the diagnosis of schizophrenia, Tourette's, or Huntington's, then that gets excluded from the quality measure for antipsychotics for long stay. And a lot of physicians have written diagnosis, and now we have to have added documentation, like 6 months of documentation. And we've been told different things, like the family can provide additional documentation, and we can document that to get, the diagnosis. But a lot of that is not working in those audits. So even the documentation we're supposed to have, sometimes when we have it, it doesn't work. So there is a lot of regulatory oversight related to the MDS, and the REI manual tells you what you can and cannot code.
Wow.
Did I answer that question?
Yeah, you did. And I think, we've had some experience together. I think we were on a technical expert panel for antipsychotics. And one of the things that came out of that expert panel was, first of all, CMS was trying to look at Medicare claims data for antipsychotics and measure that against the MDS data for antipsychotics, because their opinion was that nurse assessment coordinators might be manipulating the data because of the quality metrics. So maybe not being as forthcoming about whether or not somebody was on an antipsychotic. So they were trying to say, okay, we looked at Medicare claims data and we found that X percent of people are on antipsychotics, but when we looked at MDS, it was only X percent of people, which means they're underreporting their antipsychotic data. And what we were able to do on the expert panel was talk about some of the reasons that might happen.
Right.
Like you were on one, we took you off of it like right after you got to the nursing facility, then that would create a mismatch in claims data versus MDS data. And then the other thing was they were counting carbamazepine as an antipsychotic. So half their data is saying, hey, the people on carbamazepine, they weren't doing it on the Medicare claims data, but they were pulling it from the MDS and saying, there's this giant mismatch. Yeah. And we're like, well, of course there is, because no nurse is going to write that carbamazepine is an antipsychotic. Yeah. So,
well, we were talking about, on this subject specifically, antipsychotics, we kind of the pendulum swung in complete different direction. Several years ago, they came out and put those expectations and limitations, and all nursing homes ran around trying to DC people off of antipsychotics, and many of them shouldn't have been DC'd off of it. Now we're to the extreme where, they're getting dinged for reimbursement. They're dinged on QMs because they're on antipsychotic, but they've got a legitimate diagnosis to be on it. And now that's really an unfair level. Hey, this nursing home's great because they don't have a lot of antipsychotics. Well, maybe not. Maybe they got a lot of people that should be on it,
right?
That have actual diagnosis. But so we've got to swing right back, kind of more in the middle instead of swinging back to the other side.
Well, and Amy, I think I know how you feel, but I'll ask you to comment. Like, I've always felt like CMS has been in a position to go. They're trying to go get the bad actors. They're trying to get these,
right.
And they seem to think that those bad actors are in a much higher frequency out there than we think. So yes, are there physicians that have applied a schizophrenia diagnosis inappropriately? Of course there are. Are there pharmacists that aren't doing a good job managing the antipsychotics and getting the dose reductions done? Of course there are. But the overall feeling that they present is that all people that work in nursing homes are trying to game the system and manipulate it, and their goal is to get people on antipsychotics, and that's just not true. These nurses that are filling out the MDS are doing the best they can to do it. They're not trying to manipulate it. They're not listening to the nursing home owner and saying, hey, tweak that so that we get paid more money. I mean, is it possible? Sure. Are there instances? Probably. But the vast majority of them are not doing that. But you feel like the system is out to get you at every turn.
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, Amy, I've always felt like CMS was that I'm going to catch you doing it wrong instead of reward you for doing it right. And I know that's a major culture shift, but if any of those type of conversations or suggestions, have came up through your organization, of kind of just shifting that mentality?
Yeah, let me address. So CMS might put out the regulations, but it's really up to the state surveyors to uphold them.
Yeah.
And that's where we see a lot of difference, state to state, region to region within a state.
It's inconsistent.
And it's very inconsistent. So AAPACN has constantly gone back to CMS and said there's a lot of inconsistency. We don't understand why there's this inconsistency in how you apply the regulations. So that's one area. So you might see a state that has really high antipsychotic use, and the facilities are not getting cited. So there's no real incentive. I mean, maybe they have a dementia unit and they really have it well documented. But I'm not sure. I know Chad knows this story. I have my own personal story about antipsychotics in the nursing home. So this is so near and dear to my heart, and I really need this to change in my lifetime of being a nurse. My father had Alzheimer's dementia. He stayed at home with my mother for over 10 years, way too long. We knew he was agitated. The first time I ever noticed it, he went after my son, and he had my son by his shirt. And my son was like, he was a teenager. So of course he's mouthing off, asking what the heck is going on. I separate them and tell my mom, this could be you. You could be next.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you are a frail lady with osteoporosis. If he pushes you down, you're not going to bounce up like my son. So fast forward, we get him into a nursing home and he hits a CNA. He's on antipsychotics. We had him in the hospital. He was on antipsychotics. He hit the CNA. The nursing home then didn't want to take him back because he needed a lot of oversight from the staff that they didn't have. This nursing home was about, 1 to 3 miles maybe away from my mom's house. And when he couldn't go back to that nursing home, we struggled to find a new nursing home. We found one. It was about 50 minutes away from my mom. And my mom went to visit him every day. And this was one of the few places that would take him. The problem is they continued to do gradual dose reductions. And despite my relationship with the psychiatrist, where he was in the inpatient psych unit, because that's where he went after the nursing home sent him to the local hospital. The local hospital sent him an hour away to a medical psych unit. And I said to the psychiatrist, I really need you to write a strong and compelling note that says we will never do another gradual dose reduction. Amen. goes back to the nursing home. They do the gradual dose reduction. He becomes agitated, gets into a fight with a resident, goes back to the psych unit. And then, of course, they have to put him on stronger medications, more expensive medications. And he's sitting, my sister and I just talked about this recently. He was sitting in a chair with a tray table on it, so he was restrained and sitting there just, snowed. And me being the nurse, I'm like, it's going to be okay. They're going to work this out. They'll get him, they'll lower the dose here and they'll get him on the lowest dose possible to stop this behavior. And my sister was just like, this is not our dad. So he goes back, he's on this, he's walking, talking, eating, everything is good. And then they do another gradual dose reduction. And I'm like, how many gradual dose reductions is it going to take? And, they talked to me and said, there's black box warnings. Your dad's life is being cut short. And the nurse in me was like, do you think my father, who is a very active person, wants to be sitting here like this, doing the things? He'd be mortified if he knew that he was hitting people.
Yeah. Right.
Or calling my mom names. And so, and on top of it, I said, if he hits somebody, now a crime on the street is a crime in the nursing home.
Right.
So now what are you going to do? You're going to send my dad to jail if he hits somebody or harms somebody? And so I think that in my lifetime, I really need to see additional diagnosis either added to that exclusions, for the QM, especially in light of the agitation or the combative behaviors that you often see. And they can cause, like my dad was a big guy, 6 foot, very muscular. He could have really hurt someone. And that's the concern that I have. If we don't change this, then they're just going to continue to do these gradual dose reductions because that's the survey regulatory piece of it.
That's right.
Or they want to fix their quality measures. So they're doing it for one of those two reasons.
Right.
And it does not benefit the residents in the nursing home or the people that live in that environment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to argue that the overwhelming desire of people is that if you need a medication, that you have access to it, and that it's used conscientiously for your mom, your dad, or whoever your loved one is that is dealing with it. It is not, we don't ever want to use a certain group of medications. I mean, we're talking about antipsychotics. The MDS is obviously broader than that. What else are we doing wrong just to meet the checkbox of a metric or to reach,
in good standings or QM? Or...
We're being forced to do the wrong things. For 12 years, we've had this antipsychotic metric, and it's forced nursing homes to do the wrong things or physicians or prescribers to do the wrong things. Like, well, antipsychotics are bad, so I'm going to use an anti-epileptic instead. As if that's a safer medication, has no evidence, no data, but you know what? It doesn't count on my metrics. I'm going to use it.
Comes in generic.
Right. Or, to your point, I'm going to apply a diagnosis that gets me an exemption, even though it's probably not accurate.
Right.
But at least I don't have to deal with the ramifications of lowering this person's dose and having them deteriorate. But the reaction of CMS is not, oh, we've got to correct this because people need to be able to do the right things. It's like doubling down. Like, okay, we're going to go after anti-epileptics. Okay, we're going to have to go over that nursing home because they wouldn't accept that patient back to their nursing home.
Right. And penalize them.
We realize you can't take care of them, but too bad. Like we're not doing it right. I guess is the bottom line.
Right. And, to your point about anticonvulsants was added to the MDS. So is that going to be an unnecessary medication during survey because the person doesn't have the diagnosis? They might have an indication, which is coded on the MDS, but it doesn't have to be the right diagnosis for that medication. It's just you need an indication. So it might be, for mood stabilization or whatever the doctor might write, and then you can check that indication for a use box. Same thing with an antipsychotic. Yes, we have a reason. This person has dementia, they're combative, they're agitated, whatever it might be, but it's still going to fall on your QM unless you have those diagnoses of schizophrenia, Huntington's or Tourette's. And it's not just antipsychotics, medications overall. So Anticoagulants is another high-risk medication. So you have anticoagulants, and then you have somebody who falls all the time.
Right.
Now this is another problem, because if they fall and they're on Coumadin and they have some kind of hit their head and they have some kind of bleed, now, you are in, you, the facility, are responsible. You didn't keep this person safe, when the reality is, if they weren't maybe on this
anticoagulant.
If they weren't on, I don't know, like boom, it went out my head. Anticoagulant, they, the injury may have been less, right? I mean, if I hit my head, chances are I'm not going to have a bleed. I'm not on an anticoagulant.
Right.
So, I mean, medications are a big focus during survey, when the surveyors come in. Do they need these meds? Are these meds appropriate for this person? And do they have the diagnosis that fits the need for the medication as well?
Right.
Yeah, I think one of the most, and I forget who said it, it was one of our webinars or apexes on the new Appendix PP regulations. But one of the things that is in there is that a family member, you have to talk to a family member about consent for an antipsychotic or a psychotropic medication. Every time you change the dose up, you have to talk to them, talk about risk benefits. They have the right to say, I don't want you to increase the dose, or I don't want you to add the antipsychotic. That's their right as a caregiver, or if it's talking to the patient themselves, they have the right to do that. If it's to lower the dose, to do a GDR, they don't have to say it's okay. In fact, they could say, don't do they could be Amy and say, last time we did GDR, like, this is what happened, like, don't do it. And the prescriber does not have to comply with. It's just so backwards. Like, we can't create safe harbors for the use of medications, whether or not the family member, the caregiver, the patient themselves agree or disagree. It's only a one-way street. It's okay to take it away. We don't want to hear from you about that. But if we increase the dose to try to get some better behavioral control, we have to have your approval for that. Otherwise, we can't do it, and we have to live with the opposite ramifications of that. I don't know. It's just not. I don't know how we keep fighting, but we have to keep fighting for making sure that the patient gets the right medication at the right time for the right reason.
Yeah.
And we have to document, as you've pointed out. We have to make that stand.
Yeah. Well, we have some appropriations that we're trying to get through specifically on this subject.
We're trying to work on it.
Let me shift gears a little bit. I know you guys deal with much more than what we've talked about, specifically around staffing shortages. And, I'd say that's almost nursing shortage to me is either an epidemic or going to be. It's going to be very severe the way all the research looks, and we're in almost a perfect storm, so to speak. Labor costs have went up dramatically in the last couple of years. We've got the silver tsunami of seniors coming in. Skilled buildings are so acute now. ALF is what skilled used to be 15 years ago, and just more acute but less available nurses to handle all that surge of population that's becoming seniors. Do you guys have a magic wand, or what are you proposing? What are you guys trying to do to minimize the impact that we're headed for?
That is an absolute excellent question. And if I had a magic wand, I'd be retired, because I'd be a millionaire, maybe even billionaire, if I could fix this issue. There are multiple reasons why we have a shortage of nurses across the board. If you just want to talk across the board, schools of nursing require a lot of their faculty to have doctorate degrees. I can tell you that the pay for that is not you could better be a doctorate nurse with, as a nurse practitioner, and working in that field. So we need to have schools of nursing that can help address the shortage faster. So the 2-year schools, which are kind of on the rise again, they have huge waiting lists, huge. So right now you'd get through nursing school faster if you went to a 4-year program. And even some of those are full. And they're full because they can't find clinical sites to put their nurses in, not necessarily the classroom, but the clinical sites that they need to do, or they call them an immersion. So you go to the hospital, you go to the nursing home. So we have the education and the lack of faculty to create more nurses timely. Then you have nurses as a whole. It's kind of, COVID really took a hit on nurses. A lot of nurses my age retired. A lot of people don't want to go into nursing. And I tell every nurse that I know, speak highly about what we do. Because if you want somebody to go into nursing, you have to love it. Mm-hmm. And I do, and I love nursing. So for me, it's easy to say, I love it. I love what I do. I love being a nurse. But some people may be working in an environment where they don't love their job and they stay in it and then they speak ill of it. And I've been there too in my younger years. So how we speak to others about nursing really matters. And we need to really focus on how rewarding nursing is. And then when you talk about long-term care, this is where things get a little dicey because I think we have, in many cases, a culture issue in many facilities. And we need to address that culture issue. And I can tell you from talking to CEOs of large organizations that have good cultures, they don't have the staffing problems that other facilities see. Like, I talked to somebody who said, I feel really guilty. We don't have the turnover. We are not looking for nurses. In fact, we can't even promote from within because we don't have any openings. That's a really good problem to have, but how can we reproduce that? The thing that we're doing at AAPACN is we are actually working with Chamberlain University on something called a practice-ready, specialty-focused course. So nursing students can take this course to check out what long-term care is like. We have a lot of autonomy in long-term care as a nurse. We're the eyes and ears. We don't have a doctor 24/7. So there's a lot of opportunity to really use your assessment skills. There's also a lot of opportunity for growth. I mean, I was the director of nursing at 30. If I worked in an acute care hospital, I wouldn't have been in management until my 40s at least. Yeah. So there's a lot of opportunity, and we need to sell people on that in long-term care. You know, why come to long-term care? So that's what we're working on.
That's great. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think it's in, I think we all the disciplines kind of have that same mentality. To some degree, working in consulting pharmacy and in long-term care pharmacy, we're not like working at the retail pharmacy CVS where the public kind of sees the challenges that they have. So we tend to have more interest in the work that we do, but it's the same thing. If you don't get into the right culture, if you don't enjoy the place you're working or the team that you're working with, and that team generally is around the nursing home, then you do have struggles. If you don't, you don't. And it is the way you talk about your profession, for sure. I don't think any health profession right now isn't in the same boat, like trying to figure out how to make sure that people see these opportunities and then get the meaningful component of these opportunities. I remember graduating. I graduated in 1998 with my PharmD and went right into long-term care. And the reaction that you got from people, even I think my parents, was, wow, thank you for giving up your career to work with old people. Or he probably finished last in his class and I just work in the nursing homes.
It's always left over.
And fortunately it's changed, but like that's what the mentality was. Like that was long-term care.
Has it changed though? Because
I mean, a little bit.
I don't know, because when I graduated, nursing school in 1997, one of my instructors, she was like, "You are so gifted. Your assessment skills are top notch." And it's funny because that was only because I have this weird ability to like I can read something and then I can picture the page in my brain. So like I have Medicare manuals memorized, like the benefit manual and things like that. It was always my gift. And she said, I'm just so sad that you're going into long-term care. And I looked at her and I said, are you kidding me? I go, there's a physician there, maybe, back then, maybe once a week if we're lucky.
Yeah.
And I said, and it's so fun. I mean, where else can I work with, I worked with, one of my patients was a professor at Baylor University and she was in her 90s. So can you imagine how, I was like, you're a pioneer. Yeah. I love this. I worked, there was a lady that I took care of who was on the Lawrence Welk show. So I just thought the history and the care that, I just felt like it was a privilege to be able to work with them. But my instructors at nursing school were all like, what a waste of a good nurse. And I don't know that they're, any of them are still around, but I would love to show them, look at the things that I've done. I've been, I've advocated for these people. I've changed people's lives,
Absolutely.
The residents. And that's the most important thing, is being able to change the lives of the residents that you take care of. So I think it's the greatest honor ever.
Awesome.
One of my favorite stories when I was in consulting was that one of my facilities hired a new nurse that came from ICU, and it was his second day, and he's just overwhelmed working the unit.
Really?
The nursing, just overwhelmed.
From
right.
ICU to
right, and because his perception was, when I was in the ICU, I had 3 patients I had to pass meds for and take care of. I've got 20 at this nursing home. It was just completely, I'm like, you weren't going from the top of the pyramid to the bottom of the pyramid.
Yeah.
This is good work. It's hard work, and you have to be good at it.
Yep. Yes. Time management I had the same thing. We took somebody from CCU and she's like, I needed a little slower pace. And I said to her, I'm not sure you're going to find this as slower paced. I said, because you have to have eyes and ears. To me, this is what I told her. I was like, you're going to use all of your senses here. That's how we get through the day. You're listening, you're seeing, you're smelling, all of the senses you're using to get through your day, because you have to be able to pick up on things like this person's coming in, what's going on with them. This person is a fall risk. This person's an elopement risk. You have to really be on your toes 24/7. If you're working, whatever your shift is, you're working nonstop from the time you get there until the time you leave. But you still have opportunities to build relationships with the residents in between. I can remember back in the day, every weekend we would, and I was an LPN at the time, we would go into the dining room and sing and dance. So the other nurse that I worked with on the weekends could play the piano. And we would sing and we would dance and we would do hula hoop. And I'll never forget the day the director of nursing walked into the kitchen or into the dining room, and she took a look at us and just shook her head and walked out. And I'm like, I think we're in trouble. I know we're in trouble. And she said, you guys are not in trouble. She goes, I don't know how you guys do it. How do you come up with, because we called it the Sunday, show. It was just this other nurse and I and we would come up with something new every Sunday, whether it be dancing, whether it be hula hoop, whether it be a sing along. And it wasn't an activity, it was just and the residents were happy to see us on the weekend, because you don't have as many, you don't have doctors, you don't have as many admissions at least back then you didn't. So we had such a great time. And I think that people forget that we have such a great time in long-term care, building relationships with the residents and their families.
I think that's, you've said the magic word, which I think healthcare has generally lost, which is the relationship component. Yeah. You work in the ICU, you work in surgery, you don't have relationships with your patients. They come in, you get fixed, you leave. They might have been very nice, but there's no relationship. When you work in long-term care, you do get to meet these people, get to know them.
Extended family, get to know them.
Hear their stories. I used to love talking to patients that had Alzheimer's disease, because they could tell you in such fine detail what was going on in 1950. And it was fascinating to listen to them. Now, they couldn't remember what they had for lunch, but whatever. It was so much fun to hear their story and who they were as a person and have those relationships. But you don't get to do that everywhere.
So, Amy, I agree. I love that you love being an LTC nurse and that background. And we've asked you a few questions, but what at PACN that you're really focused on? Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to share with us that you guys are really main focus for you?
I think right now we're focused. There is going to be a few changes to the MDS this fall. There's going to be a new section R, which is health-related social needs. And so we are creating tools and resources to help people get through that. I'm actually leaving Sunday to go to the American Healthcare Association's Quality Summit, and I'm going to be speaking on this topic there because it's going to require some resources, community resources. It's not just checking the box there, not there. If somebody says, look, I don't have enough food to for the next few months, what resources? So really talking to our members about what do you need to do to prepare for that, what resources, building community resources for that, really to discharge plan, because it's going to be really important to do that. We're also preparing to release some tools related to PDPM, because some states are going to PDPM using just the nursing component or some variation of PDPM, and they don't have that knowledge. Maybe they have more Medicaid patients or residents than they do Medicare, so they've never done anything related to reimbursement. So we're also working on that. Of course, we're always working on helping facilities work on quality improvement, building a strong culture, a culture where people want to come, work, and stay. And yeah, just trying to advocate for nurses to come and work in long-term care as well.
Fantastic.
Well, you're an amazing resource for us at ASCP and for our members. I encourage our members to make sure you have a relationship with a nurse coordinator at your nursing facility. That's a critical understanding. You should be using the MDS. You should have knowledge of the MDS in the work that you're doing and help them with the MDS to the extent that they need it. One question I didn't get to ask, so I'm going to ask it real quick. What's the interoperability like for the MDS? Is there some, or is it always that the MDS coordinator has to go grab information from one system, the EHR, and then input it into the MDS? Or is there some sort of movement of data that helps them?
There is in some cases, yes. I mean, some facilities will actually do like the, interviews, and then it goes to the MDS, or sometimes maybe medications might pull. But even if you have that interoperability, you really got to be careful,
right?
Because in some cases, if you have a medication that might pull over from last assessment, and now you have a new assessment with a new ARD, that's the other thing. Sometimes it pulls previous MDS data into the MDS.
Gotcha.
And so you really always have to check, because once you send it, and it's accepted, then it impacts survey, impacts reimbursement, impacts your quality measures. And I was going to mention too, to your members, those listening, the pharmacists, we get a ton of questions about what is this medication classified as.
Yeah.
And I noticed in the RAI manual, they're now talking, read the package insert. I love package inserts. I love to read them. But that is, not a nurse on the floor doesn't have the time to read a package insert.
No.
So it is really important for our consultant pharmacists and the pharmacy, the long-term care pharmacy that you're using, to help us understand medications, especially new medications. So, for example, and I'm going to use an old example. I could never remember, this insulin pen is good for how long, and if I open a vial of this, how long is this good for? There's opportunities to educate the floor nurses. There's opportunities to work with the nurse assessment coordinator and other staff on the classification of a drug. We have this, and I remember I'm on tons of social media groups with MDS and directors of nursing, and it's like constant. And I'm like, why don't you, do you not ask your pharmacy?
Yeah.
Do you not have a resource from your long-term care pharmacy and then put that in your policy? Like, we always use this source, because what we end up getting is, I don't know if this is a hypnotic or not. I don't know if this is an anticonvulsant or not. I don't know if this is an antipsychotic or not. And it's really important to have that relationship. I'm like, why aren't you using your I used my consultant pharmacist for so many things, like education, helping us understand why going through the med cart and going through the med storage room is so important. I mean, to me, when you get cited for that, that's low-hanging fruit. And I just had a facility call me about it. And I'm like, you know what? This never should have happened. This should be on a rotation. It doesn't, because I got dinged for expired something or other in the cart or in the med room. And I'm like, this is low hanging fruit. You should never have gotten dinged for this, in the survey. But they got cited. And I'm like, the pharmacy can only be here so much. You need to have this on a rotation. So even working with the directors of nursing to have a process in place to ensure that we're doing those things, that's really helpful. There's a lot of opportunity for collaboration and communication there.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember, sometimes you would race to the facility because survey walked in, and you would do the storage check, while they were distracted with something else, and then reminding people at the nursing home that I can do this quarterly, I can look at it monthly, but the next day when the next batch of drugs comes in, you might have a problem. Like, there has to be some education involved in that. So no, that's awesome. Well, this was great. We really appreciate you being on, and love our relationship with AAPACN and with you, and just trying to move this industry forward the best we can and fight the good fights.
Yeah, let's continue on. And thank you so much for having me. It was my pleasure and honor to be on your podcast today.
It was our honor, our pleasure.
For sure. Thank you, Amy. Love your passion for long-term care.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll see you next time on Our Experience.